Welcome back to my channel. This is Brennan McDavid, and I am that professor who's talking about all things related to ancient philosophy now while we are in quarantine. Today, I'm going to be having a conversation with a dear friend and colleague, Professor Jeremy Reid of San Francisco State University. He is an expert in Greek and Roman philosophy. He's contributed to the literature in things as far-ranging as Plato's ethics to kind of contemporary virtue ethics. So he's a great scholar, and he is the perfect person to be discussing today's topic with. We will be talking about Herman Hesse's glass bead game alongside Plato's Republic. So I don't know if you've read Herman Hesse's glass bead game. It's a beautiful novel and extremely peculiar. Hesse won the Nobel Prize in 1946 for literature, and just a few years before that, he published The Glass Bead Game. It's a biographical account of a fictional person named Joseph Knecht, who grows up to enter an intellectual world called Castalia, where the members of this kind of mini society, a world within a world, are enabled to practice their intellectual pursuits to their heart's content without any need to be concerned for practical matters or political matters or any kind of hard labor. It's my idea and Professor Reid's idea that the novel and the depiction of this fictional intellectual is a really nice fit with Plato's Republic, in that it looks like it is the world of the philosopher kings inside of the ideal city and the Republic. So we will be discussing the match between these two great works today. So without further ado, let's get into this conversation. We're here to talk about The Glass Bead Game by Herman Hesse, who I think is more famous for writing Siddhartha.
I know when I was in high school, the other English classes did Siddhartha as their text, where I was doing Godot and Marquez and Kundera. But so I've come to Hesse late in the day, as it were.
This is interesting to me. When I found out about this book, because when I was down in Australia, I had a couple of colleagues who insisted that this book appear on my college's list of 100 greatest works. And it was a work that I didn't know, which kind of embarrassed me, right? So I have these colleagues I admire who are saying, this is one of the 100 greatest works ever created, alongside the David by Michelangelo. And I just thought, wow, I haven't even heard of this book. Shame on me. So I finally have picked it up. What's your first impression of the book?
I mean, you recommended it to me as a manifestation of like what the life of the philosopher kings in the Republic is like. And that's exactly how I heard it as well. That there are so many Plato references, and I think it captures so well a part of the Republic that is otherwise kind of mystifying, namely how it is that the philosophers live and why we should think that they're happy, and all of these interesting connections between music and beauty and mathematics and study. I think it makes it vivid in a way that is in some ways the perfect pairing to the middle books of the Republic.
Do you have any specific details about this world in the Glass Bead Game that you think vivifies that depiction in the Republic of these philosopher kings?
Yeah, so the emphasis on, so I did my undergrad in music and then came to philosophy a little bit later, and it's the music stuff that I really like. So one of the key aspects of education for Plato is that it has to start when you're very young, and it starts with play. So you're the reason that he does this is so that you enjoy the things that you're going to go on to do later on. And when you read it, it always seems like kind of fascist. It's like, we're going to make the kids play with carpentry toys if they're going to be carpenters, and we're going to make them play with swords and shields if they're going to be soldiers. And what I like about this book is it shows why that's kind of mistaken. The people who are going to go on to appreciate order and beauty and understanding, the thing that they start off doing is playing fugues and playing sonatas, not understanding their form, because they're 3. Like, of course they're not going to understand musical form. But the point is they enjoy the music, and it's the music that gets them to appreciate order and harmony and rhythm, and the ways in which the different voices play against each other, and the ways in which this can be communal. So something that I think gets emphasized more in the Laws than in the Republic is that a lot of the music stuff is supposed to be with like choral dancing and choral singing. And so I really like the first kind of interaction that Joseph has with the music master is them playing duets together. And again, it's about the voices overlapping and interplaying and kind of appreciating it and taking joy in it. And that's what inspires him to keep learning and to improve at his craft, is because he likes it. Again, it captures really vividly this idea that the philosopher kings aren't there because they kind of have this like overwhelming sense of duty that they need to serve the city, or that, you know, it's just because they're just like learning stuff, and they appreciate order and beauty, and that comes through from the very early stages when they're doing music.
So do you think that you learned anything about Plato through reading the book? Or do you think that it kind of confirmed all of your views about Plato, and that's part of what makes it such a warm and friendly novel?
I think it makes it more plausible. So something I didn't mention just then is, you know, one of the things which is also absolutely central to the Republic is that the citizens are supposed to be happy. They're not just doing this, again, for the sake of the city. It's true that it benefits the city, but they're also supposed to be happy in the roles that they find themselves with. And I think it is just a beautiful job showing how it is that the various kinds of like intellectual happiness manifest in Castalia. And it's, for some people, it's just enjoying what they're studying. For some people, it's a kind of like more deeply religious experience. For other people, it's just like they just like the lifestyle, and it suits them. So I think it makes that aspect plausible. And I think that's one of the hardest things to like get your head around in the Republic, is like seeing how it is the citizens and the philosophers especially are happy when they're just doing really complex abstract mathematics and harmonics and astronomy and dialectic, because we tend to associate that with like boring, tedious study that exhausts you, and it's the hard parts of doing abstract mathematics and it's the hard parts of doing logic. And yeah, it shows how it is that you could train people, and how people could, like, in a sense, naturally come to just enjoy those very abstract activities in the same way that, you know, musicians enjoy playing sonatas.
Well, you know my view on this, which is that it's not so hard to see how the philosophers are happy, because they have just souls, and we can see how they have that kind of internal harmony that results in well-being. My issue is actually seeing the happiness of the other classes in the ideal city. So the book in no way resolves that for me. But all the same, I agree with you that it makes something seem more plausible about the Republic, about this ideal city and the way that people are supposed to be living. And I think just learning about that plausibility, I guess being persuaded of that plausibility, makes me feel like I have learned something new about the Republic. You know, I've seen the argument of the Republic in a different light. And I think that's really exciting. Like, I really think that I've learned something about this book that I've read uncountably many times at this point, you know, and it makes me love it a little more in a way. Maybe it's just because I have this kind of renewed, refreshed relationship with this old classic. But it feels like a learning experience, right? I think this is a question that goes to, I mean, it's a point of interpretation. Like, I'm not really sure what to make of this aspect of the book. The the deterioration of the value of Castalia in the eyes of, I guess, people outside of Castalia parallels a deterioration of the estimation of the life of Castalia in Neck's mind, to the point that he opts to leave the world that he's
I didn't read it like that at all.
Well, okay, but that's my question. I mean, what do we make of this? We have this person who is very much a Platonic sage. I know I'm mixing things with the Stoics there, but he's the kind of ideal he's the philosopher king type, right? And he most of all is in a position to appreciate the kind of absolute value of this way of life. And he chooses to leave.
Yeah, because I think he sees that the order is failing and it needs to be reconnected with the world, otherwise it won't last. So I think this is the kind of, I saw it as the parallel of the philosopher having to stop contemplation and to rule, namely to go and do things that are objectively, less fun, but are important. And that there's a sense of duty that drives him to kind of, reconnect with the values of the world and kind of find out how to make Castalia relevant again, because they're losing it. And so the reason I think this passage, okay, so here's one point where I think Hesse actually improves on Plato. Namely, in the Republic, the degeneration of Callipolis happens because of an error in the birth number that then leads people to kind of have worse characters in terms of the gymnastic and musical education, is the line from book 8. Whereas I think the Hesse version is in some ways more plausible, namely that these people become so obsessed with intellectual pursuits and basically become like snobs that they cease to have the consideration for the ruled that they're supposed to have. They stop caring about their role in society and they stop caring about other people. They just want to do their intellectual games. And that's the kind of like intellectual decadence that prompts, I think that's the intellectual decadence that prompts Joseph to go out and see like what's happening in the world and how it is that they've kind of lost their place in that regard. So in that sense, I think it provides a more plausible view of how it is that something like Callipolis would degenerate. Namely, not that there's some failing within the system. The failing is that they become too obsessed with the intellectual exercises and they forget what the intellectual exercises are supposed to be, partly for the sake of, namely the benefit of the other people in society.
I have a quote that I'd like to read you. This is from the end. This is when Knecht has made his decision to leave. And remember, he sends the letter of resignation into the president of Castalia.
Yeah. Oh, so is that chapter, the letter chapter?
It's the chapter, The Legend, which I think is the 12th chapter.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I don't know the page because I'm in this terrible situation where I don't have my book with me because I'm quarantined out of my office.
Without a text. Unbelievable.
What is a book meeting without a book? Not the form. Okay. So he's locked in this dispute because they don't want him to resign, right? And he's really insisting. He's making his case. He says, "What I'm seeking is not so much fulfillment of idle curiosity or of a hankering for worldly life, but experience without reservations. I do not want to go into the world with insurance in my pocket in case I'm disappointed. I don't want to be a prudent traveler taking a bit of a look at the world. On the contrary, I crave risk, difficulty, and danger. I'm hungry for reality, for tasks and deeds, and also for deprivations and suffering." So when I read that, I see someone who has emerged from the cave, right, and has stood in the light of the sun and has achieved understanding of the forms. You know, this is just using the kind of Platonic language.
Yeah, that's clearly what he meant.
Yeah, and is now really ready to return to the cave. But not for some kind of mission of better organizing the cave, or even for recruiting some other cave dweller to accompany him back out. He's going back to the cave for what? I mean, what does he say? He wants to go back because he craves risk and difficulty and danger. He's hungry for reality. That's kind of interesting, right? Hungry for reality. For tasks and deeds, and also for deprivations and for suffering. I mean, this isn't a philosopher king who went through his philosophical education, did all the math, did the 5-year stint as a general. Remember that part? That's great. And then kind of emerged into dialectic and then continued on this life of the mind. This is someone who really believes that there's a lot to be gained by immersing yourself in the perceptible realm. There's something there. There's a reality there. In that way, I think it's almost like Hesse is giving a middle finger to Plato in a way, like rejecting the metaphysics in the end. I think there's something of a rejection here. Convince me that I'm wrong.
So I disagree. I think, what the moment where he gets some inkling that something is awry with Castalia is when he's visiting with the Franciscans, and he's exposed to history, like proper history for the first time. That's the first moment where he goes, I've missed something important about how Castalia fits into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what he realizes from his historical studies is that Castalia will not last. That a war will come, they'll realize it can't be funded, and the thing will break down. And it's that kind of historical awareness, understanding like how Castalia fits in with the kind of political landscape in a way that he wasn't taught. That's what starts everything. And so I kind of see him leaving as the fulfillment of that, like recognizing that he came from a place that just kind of assumed its own existence, that it was always going to last, it was always going to be fine. And from studying history, he realized it was not always like this, and it will not always be like this. And so if it's going to last in the way that it needs to find a way to reconnect with the world that no longer appreciates it.
Okay, so kind of shifting gears a little bit. This isn't about the Platonism. This is about the glass bead game itself.
Yeah.
What is this game? Going to chapter 1, the call. This is very late in the chapter, so it's probably the last 4th or 5th page of the chapter. Hesse writes, perhaps you yourself have notions about the glass bead game, expecting more of it than it will give you, or perhaps the reverse. There's no doubt that the game has its dangers. For that very reason, we love it. Only the weak are sent out on paths without perils. But never forget what I have told you so often. Our mission is to recognize contraries for what they are. First of all, as contraries, but then as opposite poles of a unity. Such is the nature of the glass bead game. What is this game?
So I mean, I love this so much. I think it's in part because it appeals to like my music nerd and my classics nerd. So if you have done like metrical analysis in poetry, you learn a symbology for explaining different kinds of meter. And you need one system of notation for like English poetry and how it works. You need a slightly different one for Greek and Latin poetry. But you could come up with a system that would represent both of them fairly. So you have one for emphasis, you'd have one for vowel weight. And indeed, that's exactly what musical notation did, is it aimed to systematize a bunch of like disparate phenomena so that you could combine them. Now, what's interesting is, of course, you can convert poetic meter into musical meter. So in the same way that we notate musical rhythms and musical weights, we could use that notation to describe poetry. And I think the really lovely thing that he does is then he shows that Chinese characters do the same thing, that they are ways of representing conceptual units. And in the same way that you could get, a notation at a higher level of abstraction than current musical notation that, for example, puts a common chord structure and rhythmic structure into a single character, you could then unify it that way. So the reason that I got so excited about this is like, give me a week and I'll come up with a notation system that could do it for the field that I know. So there's nothing like in principle why you couldn't do this. And in the same ways that, you represent different kinds of relations in mathematics and in algebra, obviously music and mathematics have a lot in common. So you could then come up with a meta language for music and mathematics that expresses proportions in particular characters. I don't know, I just thought it was a super cool idea because I take it that one of the really crucial parts of Platonic metaphysics and the appreciation of beauty and order is seeing how it is that basically mathematical relations manifest in various ways to produce good things. Then there's the famous story about how when he went to give a lecture on the good and he kind of sold out the house, but then people left disappointed because he spent the whole time talking about mathematics. This is why he thinks that the good is ultimately a kind of order, and so appreciating how the same proportions and the same kinds of balancing show up in a number of different fields to create beauty in mathematics and poetry and music. That's what it is to understand the good, is to understand these relations and to understand how they fit together in a way which is good. And again, the thought of being able to do that with a single notation system just made me really happy as a music nerd. The thought that you could represent geometrical relations, musical relations, relationships between words, and relationships between concepts with single characters. I love that. That was so cool.
I agree with you that this marries very well with the Platonic metaphysics and the idea that everything that is explicable has to be commensurable in some sense, right? So there has to be a kind of single currency or a single notation by which we can account for everything that is. I mean, that's what Plato is up to when he says that there's a single first principle. That first principle is the form of the good. There may be things that are inexplicable in the world, but those things are, not part of the order of the world. That's like the chaos of matter or something,
Yeah.
Everything that is intelligible, everything that is explicable in any way will have to be explicable according to this single notation. We actually see immediately following that, I think, kind of puzzling teaser about the glass bead game. In the following paragraph, we see Hesse bringing that kind of metaphysical point home, and I think in a beautiful way. So I'll read the passage, but one thing to look for is that he's bringing home the metaphysical thrust there, but he's also describing the aptitudes and the preferences of a person who has a knack for coming up with a notation like this. It's a really great passage. So again, this is at the end of chapter 1. In great souls, and I think this is actually you, Jeremy, in great souls and superior minds, these passions are not found. Each of us is merely one human being, merely an experiment, a way station. But each of us should be on the way towards perfection, should be striving to reach the center, not the periphery. Remember this: one can be a strict logician or grammarian and at the same time full of imagination and music. This is my point about the unity, right? One can be a musician or glass bead game player and at the same time wholly devoted to rule and order. The kind of person we want to develop, the kind of person we aim to become, would at any time be able to exchange his discipline or art for any other. He would infuse the glass bead game with crystalline logic and grammar with creative imagination. That is how we ought to be. We should be so constituted that we can at any time be placed in a different position without offering resistance or losing our heads. That's so great.
It is. It's lovely. And I mean, I think, musical study is really helpful here because classical music is at first daunting. Like when most people first listen to classical music, they don't know what to do with it. There are passages that they like and like particular pieces that they like, but I think part of what makes classical music kind of an acquired taste is you really have to be introduced to how to listen to it. And what is at first overwhelming, the more you study it, you realize that it is deeply controlled and ordered in a way that you wouldn't have anticipated. It's like when you're reading a passage, just thinking of Debussy's Prelude to the Morning of a Faun, the L'après-midi d'une Faune. And so this is a poem, this is a tone poem, like it's easily accessible, it's nice on the surface, it's pretty. But when you look at the structure, it's based on this poem by Mallarmé, which is 110 lines. And the Debussy piece is exactly 110 bars. And it follows the sequence of the poem in like this incredible way that's not at all obvious if you're just listening to it at the surface level. And like I think that's exactly the point, that like it's beautiful and it's creative and it's accessible, but there's also like this deeper order to it, and the more you get into the order, the more the kind of surface stuff you could appreciate and you enjoy it more. It's not like the order undermines what's going on in the piece. In fact, it makes it more interesting. And in the same way, like with classical music, one of the key things is tracing the harmonic and structural and thematic development. So if you can't do that when you're just listening to it or you're looking at a score, you don't appreciate all those things. But yeah, so the I think why I like that is that's exactly what I like about classical music, is you can listen to it once and it can be entertaining and fun and like fun to listen to, but then the more you study it, the more you get out of it, because you appreciate these deeper orders and these deeper structures, and then you see connections and you see how
So Herman Hesse started writing The Glass-Bead Game in 1931, and it finally was published in 1943, though banned for publication in Germany because he was a kind of known anti-fascist and all these things. So this is a moment in time when a German writer has something very significant on his mind. What do you think that the book can teach us about, you know, the rise of fascism and the Nazis in Germany? I mean, does this German have something to say about it? Or is he retreating into Castalia and kind of ignoring the practical world? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not too sure. Again, as I kind of emphasize this theme that the problem with Castalia is that it ignores the realities of politics. And in my understanding of that period, there's a lot of that going on, where basically, on the one hand, you're getting these incredible advances in science and in philosophy and in literature and in music and in art. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the period, you know, around 1900 is just one of the most like absolutely rich periods of art history. And there's a sense, though, in which you can kind of see Western civilization in Europe at its peak just before one of its darkest times. And that's kind of the mood that I get from this. It's like, it's all well and good that we're making incredible scientific discoveries, and it's all well and good that we're creating incredible pieces of art and opera and ballet and paintings and incredible pieces of literature. But if you look at the political reality, the society is falling apart. So it's that kind of tension that I see that you know, in the sense that politics is like a necessary condition of the appreciation of the better things in human life. It's not the peak of humanity, but if you ignore it, you know, you get Archimedes getting stabbed by a Roman soldier. So I guess I kind of see it. So I don't think it's a claim to, I don't see much in it that's supposed to be like a critique of fascism. I might be missing something, but yeah, I think it's more this kind of a divergence of the high intellectual life and culture with the realities of society.
Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain was published in 1924, and famously depicts this world in a wellness clinic up in the mountains, right, where people have escaped somehow from the worlds below, like whatever it is. I mean, in some ways it kind of suggests that maybe the world below is responsible for the sickness, but interestingly, people inside the sanitarium are constantly kind of getting sick, making each other sick. So there's a kind of irony there. But what's remarkable, there's a lot that's remarkable. One thing that's remarkable is that it doesn't address what's on everybody's mind, right? Which is the war, the turmoil that we're in. There's just this tiny nod in the novel, and the rest of the novel is just this kind of frivolous voyeurism where we get to look in on this world of weirdos. And in some ways, the Glass Bead game seems like it's another iteration of the Magic Mountain. Just this time, instead of a bunch of weirdos on a mountaintop, we have a bunch of weirdos playing this weird game we've never heard of, And I don't know. We have these amazing artists who have the power to bring complex social situations into something digestible, something we can understand through novels. I mean, I prescribe to the idea that novels can be very educational and character forming, and they're giving us these things that turn a blind eye to the most important issue of the day. And I can't help but wonder about the morality of that. And I can't help but wonder if maybe there is something there, because it seems a bit morally irresponsible to say nothing.
Maybe the place to think about this is in terms of the intellectual history that they do get taught in Castalia. Namely, they have this belief that's very Schopenhauerian, that music and art floats free from culture. It's contrary to how we like to interpret things now, but it was very much the sentiment in the 19th century. Art taps into this kind of deeper level of being, of which politics is just vicissitudes. And so, maybe insofar as Hesse is engaging in a critique of that attitude, there's an implicit critique of that. But I don't know. I mean, I to and fro on this one, because yeah, there's a lot that you can learn about a society from its art, and art clearly engages with society. After that, so one of my favorite scholars in musicology is Richard Ruskin, who's across the bay at Berkeley. And he wrote a book called The Danger of Music, which is all about various ways in which music gets abused and misused in society. And he opens the book with that quote from Schopenhauer about how art floats above the vicissitudes of society. And underneath it, for the epigraph, he just writes, "not." And, I kind of to and fro on that. On the one hand, yeah, obviously music and society are related, and art can be put to nefarious ends, and it can engage with society in various powerful ways. But there's also a part of me as like a student of the history of philosophy that recognizes that a lot of the truly great ideas and a lot of the truly great pieces of art and literature that human beings have managed to create are timeless in an important way. And I don't know if it's just that they speak to universal concerns or that they keep getting reinterpreted in ways which make them resonate, but I don't know, this is something that I genuinely to and fro on. I think it would be a mistake to assume that like Hesse has to be talking about his culture. But there's also, I think, a mistake in assuming that art is never about culture and never about politics in the way that the Castalians assume. I mean, one of the things which is really interesting, the philologists in Castalia, it seems to me, they all do poetry. Like they're doing Euripides, but not Thucydides. That was a deliberate choice. Like, people don't do that now. If you study classical antiquity, you study Plato alongside Thucydides and Euripides, and you should be able to do them all equally. Whereas the Italians don't like history. They don't see the point in it. They think it's low. They think it's base. They think it's corrupting, and they think it's uninteresting. So maybe that's, I don't know. I think there might be a subtle critique there. But you're right. I'm not sure. It is, if you had to guess when the Glass Bead game was written, I probably would have put it in the mid 19th century.
Okay, final question. Do you agree with my colleagues in Australia that this belongs in a 100 greatest works list?
I think that's going too far. There are a lot of things I think I'd want to put above it. I think one of the reasons that this book is hard is that, why clearly we love it so much is that we see Plato in it through and through. So if you don't have the Republic at the back of your mind, we're like, do you have the discussion of the corruption of the philosophical nature in mind as you see Joseph's friends going back into politics and then seeing them become worse and become unhappy and become jaded and become a different person that's no longer able to be friends with someone, at least as their first re-meeting after that. Unless you have Republic 6 in mind, it's unclear that you'd find that passage quite so powerful, or you'd like the references quite so much. But again, in terms of, you really have solved me that it's in some ways an invaluable tool to read alongside Plato. And insofar as the Platonic themes, I definitely think resonate, through the annals of history. It's a way to make the Republic better. It's like a catalyst for appreciating the Republic. And insofar as we should appreciate the Republic, we should read this book.